few years, particularly after the food, financial and fuel crisis, there is a view that the two can be reconciled, particularly with the emergence of the concept of green economy. And I think since 2009, Malaysia has also embraced green technology as one of the engine of growth for the country in the years to come. And in the 11th National Plan, which will be launched in the next few months, green growth is also one of the main policy focus. So I think there is a realization everywhere that the environment and development and sustainability can be reconciled, I think, and we are at the early step in thinking of this convergence.
Okay, we've seen a lot of corporates saying that, hey, we are looking into green growth and sustainability, but just to what extent are policymakers in corporates and also in governance, have they taken this seriously enough? Are we doing the right things, or is it just merely ticking the boxes?
I think it's getting more serious. The implementation is getting better. There has been a tendency to call everything green. So just because you clear a piece of land to build a green hotel doesn't make it green, because you've still cleared the land. That's right. So I think we are becoming a bit more sophisticated in how we look at these aspects. But there is a very long way to go. But we have very little land left in this country, and that means we have to make more out of what we have. So more focus on improving the productivity of our existing land. But I think it's, as the doctor said, I think it's very important that we don't see a trade-off between development and environment. You can maintain the forest, you can maintain the biodiversity, you can even enhance the biodiversity of the country, and create development opportunities, for example, in the case of tourism. And I think that's very important to focus on, that it's not a question of we have to chop down forest in order to provide development
but usually,
to the people.
When we talk about sustainability, it comes with additional costs. So how does corporate react to that?
Well, I would disagree. I think sustainability actually comes with significant advantages. You know, once you start managing your resource use much better, whether that be pesticide or fertilizer, you end up actually saving money. If you treat your employees better, and you get lower employee turnover and higher productivity. So sustainability, be it environmental or social, actually, you know, is about long-term economic growth and long-term economic well-being. So, and I think the serious companies, and government businesses that are implementing that are seeing vast improvements in their productivity because they're thinking long-term.
I think within that context, if we look at development and environment, I think as Dr. Hezri and what was pointed out, I think it's fair shift in the development planning and trust. But I think the missing gap often is the forest-based communities. And the forest-based communities feel because they have customarily owned the land or have been part of the land for long periods of time, feel sidelined in this development process, especially if there is plantation development, if there is dam development, or if there is timber harvesting and things of this sort, that these communities then feel that whatever little compensation they have got is inadequate, and they are not socially prepared or even consulted in the process of the tendering, because this then has a far more serious impact vis-a-vis EIA reports, the impact assessment on environment, or the social impact assessment. Who's doing it, who's monitoring it, who then has a say to this kind of development. And the grievances of indigenous people, both in Sabah, Sarawak and Peninsula, as recorded through the Human Rights Commission report on land inquiry and their grievances, is quite extensive. And this is a sort of almost politicized issue with contestation between the powerless at the bottom with big companies and politicians and the bureaucracy. And these people then feel sidelined. And so we can't talk about development, environment, sustainability if the people of the forest don't have a key say in this whole development. And I'm not, you know, and I think that needs to come into the equation quite strongly in the process.
Do you feel that it's lacking of engagement when it comes to policy making?
Of course, if you take the the estate population as estate workers, there's never been any consultation in terms of policy making. What policies, whatever policies that they had never been implemented properly. So that I'm talking about the estate communities. They have, I mean, in terms of toilets, in terms of playing fields, in terms of educational facilities, all this has been substandard. I think there are enough laws in the ministry or in the government to implement these laws so that their quality of life in the estate could be better. But that is one of the reasons as to why the youth do not stay in the estates, because the pull outside is better and the push from the estates is there because of the environment. The environment is not conducive for them to stay. Even in housing, for example, not all the estates have got proper housing. And so these are some of the problems in terms of environment. But we should be talking in terms of the whole environment. And 55% of our country is under forest, and we don't want to lose it. It's a heritage. And whatever space that we have, 45% we have, and I agree with her that if we use this space more efficiently and effectively, definitely the productivity will go. There is no need to go and deforest. I mean, there's no need to clear the forests. So I think there are enough policies in the government. For example, in terms of environmental protection, there is the environment policy, there is a green technology policy, there is climate change policy. All these policies are there in the 10th Malaysia Plan. And then the fact is, to what extent these have been implemented, and whether the civil society understand this, the awareness of this green technology and the sustainability of our environment. I think it is very, very important that education should start. I think it should be put in the curriculum, for example, about the environment, the importance of environment, the protection of environment. And I just read somewhere that because of environmental degradation, the species, bird species, about something like 100 over, are extinct. So I think we are losing something. And therefore, I think it's very important, at least, that we keep this forest, 55% of our environment, and also protect our environment. And because we did not do this properly, that we had floods and we had all the other natural disasters. I think this is something that we must take into consideration and must take it as a very important factor.
So there is no lacking in policy, but I believe maybe what we lack is perhaps enforcement and also getting the buy-in and also the inclusiveness of having the custodian to have a say in policy and formulation. We'll talk about that. We'll have to go for the last commercial break, but to stay with us. Welcome back to the last segment of the 9th Merdeka Award Roundtable discussion on bridging the rural urban divide. I'd like to go straight to Dr. Hezri, because earlier we're talking about growth, and with the rising population, there's going to be more demand for energy, for food, for water, and that inadvertently we will go deeper into the forest, deeper into the ocean to get these resources at the expense of the environment. How do we go about that then?
Yes, there is a lot of talk now about the security nexus of food, water, and energy. But on top of that, you also need to add forest and climate change as well, I think. I just would like to pick up from what Tan Sri said earlier about implementation. I think that's the million-dollar question in moving forward. The forests, before we started with our plantation economy, we had in the peninsula at least about 90% of the area was under forest cover. But now we're down to about 44%. And this is causing, all the problems that we're seeing now, water disruptions and, floods is also an issue if we're not treating forests in a serious way. So moving forward, we have to think of a way to really lock up certain key environmentally sensitive areas that provide for the services that the cities need, I think. And to do that, we know that the state government holds the power when it comes to land administration. I think there needs to be another business model. How do you get the state to conserve some of these areas? I think that's a million-dollar challenge, I think.
Okay. Tan Sri?
I think environmental sustainability is a very important question. And very soon, in the next 10, 20 years, there will be a world shortage of water. There will be shortage of energy, and there will be shortage of food. Some people say that there won't be any shortage of food because we can innovate. There is green revolution, and therefore we can produce enough food. But the problem is the food is not distributed evenly, and that is the problem. So insofar as Malaysia is concerned, in terms of food security, we are okay because we have been working on self-sufficiency of rice. We have 70% of self-sufficiency, but we buy the other 30% cheaper from the other neighboring countries. But in terms of other stuff, we are quite self-sufficient in terms of food, fruits and vegetables and meat and poultry and so on, except in beef and mutton and milk, we are short. We import that. Therefore, there is this law of comparative advantage. So we produce what we can, what we best can produce. Therefore, those who produce cheaply, then we import. So I think it is important that we conserve our environment and also the forest. And I think what we need, I think 11th Malaysia Plan, Doctor said that there is this green revolution being, again, being emphasized. I think it's very important that the people become aware. I mean, we are already experiencing shortage of water, So it's not going to be too long before we find that all of us are going to.
So this goes back to implementation that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
And like you said, we have tons of policies for different areas of development, but enforcement, Dato.
Yeah, I think the background critical issue is federal-state relations, federal-state funding available. So from my limited understanding of state government, we are looking at what are the sources for state government, and land becomes their critical source other than other forms of domestic taxation that they can put. So it's then utilization of the land or other kinds of things vis-a-vis land. And as a result, they are seeking to generate more income. So if there is a reworking of allocation of funding from federal to state, that could address this. Or federal government allocations provide greater funding for more sustainable management of forests and other sorts of issues related to agriculture or use of land. That might be one way in which state governments, irrespective of who's running the state government, might be then directed towards better utilization of land.
Well, apart from this relationship between federal, state, corporate, and then also funding, we also have to take into account the inclusiveness of getting their say in policy formulation and like
The people.
themselves. And are we lacking in that department?
I think I can't really speak to policy. You know, it's not really my area of expertise. But
okay.
I think there has been a tendency from companies and companies acting on behalf of government policy to sometimes assume, you know, what's best for people. And you know, there's been a lot of successes in this country. I think Felda is a great example of bringing development to rural areas. But I think, as we talked about earlier, there's a group left living in the forest, living deep in the interior, who in many ways would like to stay there, you know, who would want to maintain their culture. And I think it's absolutely critical that they have a very large say, and in fact what we would call free, prior and informed consent to how the area that they inhabit and have inhabited for thousands of years should be developed. And maybe we can learn something from that. Maybe, you know, there is something to be had for the greater good in understanding how that forest can sustain life and growth.
Well,
Actually, in other countries, there are good models in which forest-based communities manage the forest. Nepal has good models on community foresting policy. And this is something in which you can also link it to ecotourism, you can do protection of the forest,
Right.
and local people then can be paid for these services, and they have local knowledge. They know the hills, the rivers, the valleys in the forest, the animals, the plants. We're not tapping them at that level.